Did you know there's a place called the Door to Hell in Turkmenistan? It's a massive crater over 220 feet wide and nearly 100 feet deep, continuously ablaze for at least 50 years, casting flames across the remote, barren landscape. Despite its ominous name, you won't hear the cries of damned souls or see mythical creatures emerging from its depths. Yet every year, curious adventurers venture into the empty, desolate desert to witness the fiery spectacle of the gates of hell for themselves. So, how did this doorway open to the supposed infernal realm of eternal suffering? Despite what some overzealous evangelical types will tell you, there really is no such thing as hell. According to the most widely accepted story, in 1971, a Soviet drilling rig accidentally punctured a huge cavern underground filled with natural gas. The ground beneath the rig gave way, and the rig was swallowed up by the earth, causing poisonous gases to leak out of the ground. So to prevent potentially massive environmental damage, the Soviets set the crater alight, expecting the gas to burn out in a few weeks at most. But after decades, the fire still hasn't stopped. In 2013, explorer, storm chaser, and adventurer George Kourounis became the first human being to descend into the fiery pit using a Kevlar climbing harness, fire-resistant ropes, and a heat-resistant suit, and a self-contained breathing apparatus. He described the experience of being surrounded by continuously burning orange flames as otherworldly. The door to hell is far from the only creepy and mysterious place in the world, though. In fact, despite the breadth of human understanding, bizarre phenomena that seem to defy any logical explanation continue to occur. Some evidently receive answers, but not always. So join us as we adventure across the globe to find some of the creepiest, unexplained phenomena from around the globe. Contrasted against Antarctica's stark white snowy landscape is a sight that'll make your blood run cold. Actually, that's exactly what it looks like too. Trickling out of the Taylor Glacier in the McMurdo Dry Valleys of East Antarctica is what seems to be a stream of blood, staining the snow crimson as it flows into Lake Bonny below. It's not the only body of water in the world to turn a worrying shade of red either. The same thing has been observed in Lago Vermelho, Iraq, and Iran's Lake Urmia. However, rather than being caused by certain types of algae, as is believed to have happened with those other examples, the water of Antarctica's blood falls has been dyed into this blood-red color by something millions of years old deep beneath the glacier. An exceptionally salty subglacial lake formed beneath the Taylor Glacier approximately 2 million years ago. This hypersaline environment, devoid of light, oxygen, and warmth, preserved the ancient brine. When the brine emerges from beneath the glacier, its reaction with atmospheric oxygen prompts a rapid transformation, causing it to adopt a distinctive rusty hue due to the presence of iron-rich nanospheres. The high salinity of the brine prevents it from freezing, allowing this unique phenomenon to persist and captivate visitors with its striking red waters. Its bloody appearance is an almost fitting visual metaphor for the deadly consequences of shrinking ice caps and glaciers thanks to global warming. Talk about a chilling sight. Blood on the ice isn't the only frightening sight out there. In December 1872, a ghostly vessel was spotted adrift in the Atlantic Ocean. Not a soul was aboard, and yet there was no sign of damage to the ship. The entire vessel and its cargo were fully intact, missing only its lifeboat, which seemed to have been boarded in an orderly fashion by those on board. Not a single crew member was ever seen or heard from again, seemingly having left their ship empty and adrift in the sea, only to vanish without a trace. A month earlier, in November 1872, the Mary Celeste left New York, bound for Genoa, Italy. Aboard were the ship's captain, his 5- and 2-year-old daughters, and 7 other crew members, transporting enough supplies to survive at sea for 6 months. The ship itself was seaworthy and prepared for the journey, so something pretty extraordinary would have needed to happen for the entire crew to abandon the ship. But the last entry in the Mary Celeste's daily log revealed nothing out of the ordinary, making it all the stranger that the ship would be discovered a month later, drifting without a soul on board. To this day, there's never been a concrete explanation as to why. Mutinous crew, an attack by pirates, or even some kind of sea monster have all been offered up as theories, but not one seems to hold much water. The crew of the Mary Celeste has hardly been the only group of people to disappear without so much as a trace, and nothing but confusion and unanswered questions in their wake. It's February 1959. In a mountainous pass near modern-day Russia, a group of 9 hikers is enjoying dinner and each other's company at their campsite, situated on the slopes of one of the mountains. After a decent night's sleep, another day of adventure awaits them, or so they undoubtedly thought. Weeks later, people searching for the missing hikers discover the group's tent. It had been left abandoned and seemed to have been ripped open from the inside. The footprints left behind in the surrounding area of the Dyatlov Pass made no sense. Some were from people wearing only a single boot, others in socks or barefoot. Search parties would discover the first 2 bodies of the missing hikers, both in a state of undress. While it first seemed like hypothermia was to blame, as more of the hikers' bodies were discovered, that explanation seemed to make less and less sense. One of the discovered bodies displayed signs of blunt force trauma, suggesting they'd been brutally assaulted, but another bore third-degree burns, and another appeared to have been vomiting blood before their death. Another hiker was missing their tongue, and traces of radiation were detected on their clothes. The Dyatlov Pass incident still remains unsolved. Some theories point toward the hikers venturing into an area they weren't permitted to access, leading to some interference with their journey at the hands of the KGB. Others have pointed to one or more of the group possibly suffering a drug overdose or a psychotic episode, and some even lay the blame on UFOs or the Russian equivalent of the Yeti. One of the most interesting explanations has to do with the phenomenon of infrasound. When the wind interacts with the different topographies, it can result in a barely audible hum that can induce powerful feelings of nausea, panic, paranoia, raised heartbeat, and difficulty breathing. While this might sound like something completely out of science fiction, infrasound could be behind more than just the Dyatlov Pass incident. For years, residents and visitors to Taos, New Mexico have reported experiencing a strange sound carried by the desert air. The Taos hum is believed to be a faint, low-frequency noise that only seems perceptible to around 2% of the people living in the small desert city. Some people believe unusual acoustics in the area caused the hum. Others attribute it to being more psychological in nature, perhaps suggesting a mass hysteria among some in the area. Bizarrely, a survey among those affected by the Taos hum revealed that each person who's able to hear it hears a slightly different sound, some describing it as a whirring or a buzzing or a humming. This would suggest that Taos hum isn't just a particular sound, but a subjective experience for those affected. Yet nobody in or around Taos has ever been able to locate the exact origin of the hum, and it's far from the only strange sound out there, lacking a convincing explanation. At the American Embassy in Havana, Cuba, in 2016, a CIA officer was admitted to the health office complaining of headaches, nausea, and dizziness. Within days, 2 more officers reported the same symptoms. Over the course of the next 2 years, 26 Americans and 16 Canadians who visited the embassy experienced the same, with some even having symptoms so bad that they led to vertigo, hearing loss, trouble focusing, and even nosebleeds in some cases. But in all these different cases, those affected claimed to have heard a strange noise in their homes or hotel rooms. Some described high-pitched white noise. Others insisted they'd heard a sound more like marbles rolling along the floor. Medical experts were left baffled by these symptoms. They seemed to closely resemble those experienced by people suffering a concussion, but not one of the officers affected had any other indicators of a possible concussion. Many suspected the Cuban government's involvement in causing these victims to fall sick suspiciously. However, they denied any responsibility, and many American investigators even believed them. Some suggested that listening devices placed by human agents could have accidentally been installed too close together, producing an ultrasound reaction. However, there is no evidence of this. Ultrasound is a frequency above the range of human hearing. Nonetheless, the U.S. pulled 60% of its diplomats out of Cuba and expelled 15 Cuban diplomats from Washington, D.C. But then in 2018, a similar thing happened again, only this time in China, at the consulate in Guangzhou. An American posted there began suffering similar symptoms, and as a result, 15 Americans were evacuated for fear of those mysterious, seemingly airborne brain injuries. From unexplained sounds in the air to mysterious lights in the sky, among the plethora of inexplicable phenomena across the world, some can be quite unique and incredibly beautiful, providing that seeing them doesn't make you worry that you're about to have a close encounter of the third kind. Light pillars can often resemble beams of light, often seen emanating from extraterrestrial craft in your more stereotypical depictions of aliens and flying saucers. But sometimes against the night sky, especially in the Arctic, but also in certain colder parts of the US and Canada, you can see narrow paths of light extending upwards into the night. Light pillars aren't quite supernatural and certainly aren't as otherworldly as they might appear to be. They're usually caused by cold air freezing the moisture in the air into tiny crystals, which then fall downwards to the ground. As these crystals catch the light from the street lamps, buildings, and other sources, they can project an illusion of a tall, thin beam of light. If it's cold enough and you're situated somewhere with a decent view and the right conditions, then perhaps you'll see some light pillars for yourself. Or if you're trying to pull off a delightfully devilish misdirection, then at any time of day and any time of year, in any part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen, you too might catch a glimpse of another famous and mysterious light in the sky, the aurora borealis. Steamed ham aside, the northern lights have been captivating human beings for thousands and thousands of years. Ribbons of green and purple light streaking across the sky at night, seen not just from numerous countries in Europe, but even visible from some parts of the US, in particular Alaska, Minnesota, Michigan, and Maine, are considered to be the most common states where one can catch a glimpse of the aurora borealis. But for all the awe-inspiring beauty and wonder of the northern lights, the airborne light show is far more violent than you might first assume. The colorful lights seen overhead are created when energized particles from the sun come slamming into Earth's upper atmosphere, racing at speeds up to 45 million miles per hour. Thanks to the magnetic field around our planet, we are thankfully spared from the bombardment of deadly solar-energized particles. The magnetic field even redirects those toward both the North and South Pole. And yes, this even leads to there being similar southern lights on the other side of the planet, also called the aurora australis. However, energized sun particles are only one half of the process. When the sun is ejecting these particles, it creates a solar wind, slamming into the ionosphere, the Earth's upper atmosphere. That solar wind then collides with the energized particles and thus creates an aurora. As they interact in the atmosphere, the energy of these particles causes the fluorescent lights, thanks to the chemicals present within the atmosphere and their reactions with the energized particles from the sun. For example, one of the more commonly seen colors in the aurora borealis is green, which is produced by oxygen molecules. But what about the lights in the sky that can't be so simply explained away? The phenomena of unidentified flying objects has long since moved out of the realm of impossibility. Air Force pilots and naval officers have often reported spotting things in the sky that they just can't fully identify, whether they're meteors, aircraft, or other airborne objects. Back in July of 2023, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned whistleblower and 2 pilots testified before members of Congress about their experiences with strange and inexplicable objects they encountered during flights. And they are far from the only pilots to report such encounters. There have been hundreds of similar accounts over the years. Of course, none of that means we're on the verge of an all-out Independence Day-style extraterrestrial invasion. Not every UFO sighting proves the existence of aliens, just that there are things in the sky that can't be so quickly or accurately identified. UFOs have become more widely talked about since more and more evidence has proven their existence to be true, at least the existence of strange airborne objects themselves. The detection of such objects has even been confirmed to be an area that NASA is studying with keen interest, albeit under a different name. For years now, NASA has revealed that it's been looking into various unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs for short. This was previously used to mean just unidentified aerial phenomena, but the terminology was broadened to include anything detected in the air, sea, or even out in space that defies any straightforward explanation. However, according to NASA, there isn't any reason to jump to conclusions, and there's nothing to indicate that aliens were behind the hundreds of UAP sightings that had already been investigated. But speaking of things in the sky that defy explanation and can disappear as quickly as they seem to appear, it brings us to one of the most tragic and still unexplained mysteries of the last decade. On the 8th of March 2014, a Boeing 777 left Malaysia on a flight to China with 239 passengers and crew on board, a flight that would sadly never reach its destination. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 would vanish seemingly into thin air not long after its departure, leading to the largest multinational search effort in aviation history. Over the 3 years that followed, thousands of square miles of oceans would be scoured at the cost of around $160 million to find the missing plane and determine exactly what had happened. However, hardly any trace of Flight 370 has ever been discovered. Even debris that indicates that a crash or an emergency landing took place has been extremely difficult to find. All anyone knows is that it disappeared somewhere over the Indian Ocean. As with any horrifying and disastrous occurrence that doesn't at least have an explanation for them, the open-endedness of this mystery has allowed for conspiracy theories over what really happened. Among them are speculations over the flight possibly being hijacked or a fire breaking out aboard the aircraft. Some suggest that the U.S. could have had something to do with capturing the plane, and others point to an even potentially diabolical act of mass murder by one of the pilots, who was reported to be having marital trouble. Unfortunately, theories don't provide an answer or closure for those who may be seeking it, and are often more people looking for something or someone to pin their anger and fear on. From an aviation disappearance without an explanation to a maritime mystery, and one that we suspect movie director Robert Eggers might have been at least partially inspired by, not that he'd ever spilled the beans if that were true. In 1900, off the west coast of Scotland, lived the Flannan Isles Lighthouse. At the time, 3 men were manning the lighthouse, and a 4th would come in from the shore to relieve one of the others of duty, allowing them to return to the mainland. As planned on Boxing Day of 1900, the relief keeper set out to the lighthouse expecting to be greeted by the 3 men stationed there. Yet when he arrived, there wasn't a soul to be found. The place had been deserted, with indicators all around that things were amiss. The beds were unmade, clocks unwound, and a single chair had been left overturned by the kitchen table. Not one of the other lighthouse keepers was ever found, leading to speculation as to what had become of them, whether they had drowned or if the harsh winds of recent storms had blown them over the cliffs. Nobody knows what happened to the keepers of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse in December of 1900. Maybe they went mad and started raving about sirens, merfolk, bad omens, and the like, or perhaps one of them killed a seagull in a fit of rage. After all, it is bad luck to kill a seabird. Heading back to dry land, and we do mean very dry, to talk about rolling stones. No, not those rolling stones. We're talking about the very literal rolling stones that seem to move across the desert all by themselves. Also referred to as sailing stones, these heavy rocks leave a telltale trail behind them, with a few famously being found in Death Valley National Park, California, on the bed of the dried lake Racetrack Playa, and at Little Bonnie Claire Playa in Nevada. Some of these stones are as wide as 5 feet and weigh up to 300 kilograms. It would have taken Herculean strength for some local prankster to have shifted them, and to what end? All for the sake of confusing people? Usually a prank has an intended point, a reaction that the prankster gets to see or at least imagine. Moving ginormous stones around in the desert doesn't seem all that conducive to achieving anything. The trails left behind added to the mystery of how these boulders moved. Some were straight, while others weaved from side to side, leaving distinct curves in the rolling stones' paths. Suspicions then shifted from pranksters to magnetic fields and, inevitably, of course, aliens. But the answer was eventually cracked by a NASA scientist, Ralph Lorenz, who demonstrated how these stones had seemingly sailed across the desert. The Racetrack Playa was filled with water in the winter, so the stones were encased in ice when temperatures dropped. With the ice being more buoyant than stone, a light breeze could easily roll the frozen stones across the lake bed, leaving trails that could be seen when in warmer months the ice melted and the water evaporated, leaving just the stones behind. From rolling stones to people appearing to become stone. Between 1917 and 1928, an affliction swept much of the world, starting in Europe and reaching epidemic levels there, and in North America to India by 1919. Encephalitis lethargica, more commonly called sleeping sickness, was horrifying. Those suffering from it would become inexplicably frozen stiff while still alive and conscious. Although they remained fully aware of their surroundings, nearly half of those afflicted with sleeping sickness were left totally motionless, with the luckier ones still capable of basic speech or eye motion. This could last anywhere from hours, days, or weeks to as long as years. The exact cause of encephalitis lethargica remains unknown, although scientists have theorized that it could result from brain inflammation caused by a particular strain of Streptococcus. This is the same bacteria that causes sore throats and was thought to have mutated into a variant that causes a person's immune system to attack their own brain, leaving the victim helpless and unable to interact with the world around them. Even if that is the case, it doesn't explain where the illness came from and what caused it to appear in the early 20th century, only to disappear as quickly as it started. That's not to say the sleeping sickness is gone for good, though. In the 50s, there were sporadic cases of encephalitis lethargica reported in Europe, and even a case in China as recently as a decade ago. While the sleeping sickness is a disease that many would consider the stuff of nightmares, the quaint, picturesque setting of Bolton Strid in Yorkshire, England, might initially seem like a place from a dream. Yet you might not realize until it's too late that this creek, seemingly taken right out of a mystical forest from a fantasy story, is one of Earth's deadliest bodies of water. Although it might not look like it, Bolton Strid has something that not many country creeks have: an extremely high mortality rate. Located in a wooded stretch of Yorkshire, the Strid is part of the River Wharfe, which runs past the ruins of an ancient monastery known as the Bolton Priory. Although the banks of Bolton Strid are only 6 feet apart at their closest point, attempting to cross can be highly dangerous, if not outright fatal to anyone who ends up in the water, whether stepping in it on purpose or falling in by accident. The risk of this unassuming creek lies in how quickly it narrows. Only a few yards upstream, it's shallow and wide, about 30 feet from bank to bank, but the rocky terrain effectively bottlenecks it further down, where it becomes a narrower, powerful, and treacherous wedge of water. The riverbed also gets much deeper, making getting a footing all the more difficult once someone falls in. If they do, the currents are strong enough to pull them downstream, where they can either be battered against the rocky walls on either side of the Strid or pulled into one of the crevices beneath the surface. Despite it being considered one of the deadliest streams in the world, there's never been an official death toll for the Bolton Strid. From banks to bridges, this potentially is one of the most upsetting phenomena on this list. We recommend skipping it if you are distressed by hearing about animals in danger. In Dumbarton, Scotland, just northwest of Glasgow, you can find an ornate 19th century Gothic-style bridge reaching across a 50-foot ravine. This is known as the Overton Bridge, a place with a sinister claim to infamy thanks to the spate of deaths that have taken place there since as early as the 1950s. But not human deaths, dogs. For reasons still hard to explain, something about this bridge causes dogs to leap from the Overton Bridge to their deaths. At least 50 dogs have perished here, with some claiming the number goes up to 100. Even more strange is that some pooches have managed to survive their initial jump toward the jagged rocks below and have gone to take a second leap from the bridge. The Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals even had its investigators take a look at the area, but they were unable to discern exactly what was luring these dogs off of the bridge, and usually at the same spot. There are a few theories about the truth behind the bridge. One suggests that the dogs weren't trying to cause themselves harm, but were drawn to the irresistible scent of woodland animals. Another suggests there could be some auditory anomaly at the top of the Overton Bridge that only dogs can detect. And then there's the popular local legend that the bridge is haunted by a grieving widow named the White Lady of Overton, whose ghostly presence can stir those poor pups into a frenzy. There's even a second supposed ghost at the bridge after a horrific death in 1994. A mentally disturbed father, convinced his child was the Antichrist, threw his baby into the gorge below the Overton Bridge. Whatever the cause, it's a worrying reminder to dog owners to keep their four-legged friends on their leashes. A secluded spot is every holidaymaker's dream, finding somewhere off the beaten track to enjoy your vacation, away from prying eyes. And if you can find it, then Playa del Amor, or the Hidden Beach, is exactly that. This secret spot is tucked away from the masses on one of the Marietta Islands off the coast of Mexico, and as far as we can tell, it doesn't cause anyone who goes there to experience rapid aging. This is not a beach that makes you old, although its origin is hardly just nature happening to form a beautiful, secluded shore. The Hidden Beach was created by the blast of a bomb during a test by the Mexican government in the early 1900s. The Marietta Islands were uninhabited at the time, so instead they served as target practice. This resulted in a gaping hole left behind on the surface of one of the islands, which over time filled with sand and water. The Hidden Beach earnestly lives up to its name, as not only can it not be seen from the outside, but it can only be accessed by a 24-meter-long tunnel linking it to the ocean. Still, if you can make the journey, and as long as you don't mind sunbathing in a crater, we've heard that it is quite a nice place to visit with the person you're hoping to grow old with. Wait, not like that. Traveling somewhere much higher to another hard-to-reach spot, but one that's somehow far more deadly than a literal bomb site. Mount Everest, the tallest mountain above sea level, standing at over 29,000 feet. Naturally, climbing Everest is no easy feat, and 330 people have lost their lives either trying to reach the mountain's peak or return from it. But Mount Everest's highest area is so dangerous that it officially is referred to as the death zone. This doesn't just apply to Everest. The death zone is the altitude where oxygen becomes too thin to sustain life. This is typically around 26,000 feet above sea level. But along with the lack of oxygen, would-be Everest climbers had to battle the additional punishment of freezing cold temperatures and much stronger ultraviolet radiation from the sun at this altitude. Hence why the Mount Everest death zone is even more deadly. Even if someone had enough oxygen, their body is essentially dying one cell at a time every second they stay in the death zone. putting them at a higher risk of strokes and heart attacks, as well as trouble with reasoning and judgment brought on by that whole lack of oxygen to the brain. Of course, one thing you're much less likely to be at risk from while climbing Mount Everest, even in its death zone, is being rocked by a sudden and devastating explosion. But if you've been exploring the forests of Siberia on the morning of the 13th of June 1908, then you could have been caught in the blast of the Tunguska event. For unknown reasons, around 770 square miles of the Siberian forest were flattened by an explosion. What caused it? Well, nobody knows for sure since there were no witnesses. This raises the age-old question, if several thousand trees fall in Russia and no one is around to hear them, do they even fall in the first place? It turns out they do indeed. The phenomena of the Tunguska event left pine forests charred, and the explosion itself was estimated to have the equivalent force of 15 megatons of TNT. That would make it 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in August 1945. Scientists have since classified it as the largest impact event ever recorded. An impact event is the recordable collision of two astronomical bodies, say between the Earth and an asteroid impacting it. However, there has never been any impact crater found, leading some to theorize that the Tunguska event may have been caused by a comet that fell to Earth but exploded before reaching the surface, causing all the destruction that was found below in Siberia. But with no evidence or witnesses to the Tunguska event, scientists can only surmise what happened that day in the forests. Speaking of dwelling in the forests and places you'd have to be brave to tread, the summit in passes of Scotland's second highest mountain, Ben Macdui, or in native Scottish Gaelic tongue, Amferliath Mor, are said to be the home of a particularly creepy resident. The Big Gray Man might sound like the title of a cheap horror B-movie, but that doesn't make him any less frightening to the eyewitnesses who've purported to have caught a glimpse of him lurking around the mountain summit. Described as, much like his name suggests, being extremely tall, many claim the Big Gray Man stands at well over 10 feet in height, with a humanoid appearance and features, despite his unusual height. He's said to also be incredibly thin, with short hair, broad shoulders, and elongated arms. However, aside from a general feeling of unease around the mountain, the one commonly recurring detail across all the reported sightings is the sound made when the Big Gray Man approaches, the noise of gravel crunching beneath heavy footfalls. He's said to walk behind climbers who reach the summit of Ben Macdui, making the sound as he does. What makes the Big Gray Man potentially so frightening is that there is no scientific explanation for that specific sound said to accompany so many sightings of the creature. Unlike the Yeti in the Himalayas, or a certain larger-footed individual thought to roam the American Pacific Northwest, sightings of the Big Gray Man can't be simply dismissed as being merely a bear or a sighting of another wild animal, since his physical characteristics are much closer to that of a human being, although with altered proportions. However, apart from a few photographs of unusual footprints and eyewitness tales that may or may not be credible, evidence proving the existence of the Big Gray Man has been as limited as explanations to the contrary. And speaking of unusual footprints and dubious existence, no video about creepy unexplained phenomena would be complete without Bigfoot. For decades, sightings of this tall, hair-covered humanoid creature, or species of creature depending on who you ask, have been reported by people all across America. However, despite the thousands of Sasquatches that would need to exist if they were to have a breeding population, not a single body of one has ever turned up. Deer and other woodland wildlife are constantly being accidentally caught in the paths of speeding cars, or shot by hunters, or are even just found dead from natural causes. So this begs the question, are Sasquatches like Bigfoot just so reclusive that they can hide from humans even in death? While the lack of hard evidence like bones or teeth makes it hard to say that Bigfoot does indeed exist, it's equally challenging to prove they don't. After all, who's to say that these mysterious beasts don't just manage to stay entirely away from prying human eyes, except when they're spotted in grainy, ambiguous photos or videos, or in eyewitness accounts on a local news station during a slow week? Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or its various possible relatives like the Himalayan Yeti or the Floridian skunk ape are part of a long-standing unexplained phenomena in and of itself: cryptids, creatures that have long been claimed to exist, but without any concrete proof. From the Loch Ness Monster to the Mothman to the Jersey Devil, the Chupacabra, and the Wampus Cats, the continued popularity of these strange animals and the entire existence of cryptozoology itself raises an interesting question: just how many of them could be out there? After all, myths and legends of these cryptids are so widespread and varied, present across so many different countries and cultures, and have enough longevity to last until the modern day. Those stories don't just exist over nothing. They have to start somewhere. Now check out Weirdest Unsolved Mysteries, or watch this video instead.